It's the next morning, and Vanessa, Crowley's girlfriend, is in the kitchen making everyone breakfast. Nicky is still fast asleep in the living room. Crowley is at his desk as usual, surrounded by books on ancient lore and esoteric principles, as well as occult books. I can't believe it. Right here under our noses, right in the middle of New York City, an actual hellmouth. Scary stuff. But that actually explains a lot, to be honest. Vanessa chuckles. She sets down a tray with tea and a buttered croissant. It was incredible, Vanessa, and surprisingly beautiful, Crowley says. Scary nonetheless, he continues. Yeah, I'm sure there's nothing more beautiful about screams of terror and blinding heat. I think you were exaggerating if it wasn't for your tennis shoes smelling like burnt rubber, Vanessa says, pouring some tea for herself. You should have seen her. She handled herself like a true slayer, Crowley says. How did you explain the hellmouth part? Vanessa asks, buttering her toast. I gave it to her straight. A portal to a hellish dimension where nasty little demons scurry from another world and into ours, Crowley says. Vanessa playfully pops him on the shoulder. Well, I was hoping you were more conservative than that, Bernie. She's still a little girl, Vanessa says. Hardly, Crowley says. I didn't quite put it that way, but she understands the implications of its existence, Crowley says, smiling. Nicky walks in past Crowley and Vanessa and plops down on a chair in the room. There's breakfast in the kitchen, sweetie, Vanessa says. I'm too creeped out to eat. I had the most vivid dream last night. 2 musclehead vamps had me cornered in an alley, and a weird lady dressed in black said some weird stuff. I can't remember. And then one of the vamps stakes me, and then I woke up. Well, maybe seeing the hellmouth for the first time scared you more than you think, Vanessa says. First time, Nicky says. I'm not gonna make it a second time. It was like something out of a sci-fi movie, Nicky says, chomping down her stolen toast. Crowley doesn't see a connection. However, from what I've heard, slayers have a unique sense of premonition, Crowley says. Just be extra cautious today, he continues. You have gymnastics at noon on Saturdays, right? You better get going. It's 11:15, Crowley says. Nicky nods in agreement and heads to the restroom. An hour later, Crowley and Vanessa find themselves heading toward the subway station with the hellmouth. When you said brunch, this is not what I had in mind, Crowley says. What? We ate first, Vanessa says, smiling and holding Crowley's hands as they walk toward the blocked-off subway station. They head down without any passerby noticing. Vanessa expresses her fear of rats. Vanessa also pulls out 2 flashlights and passes one to Crowley. He gives her a look and takes it. I have to see it, Bernie. Do you think LeBlanc is connected to this? Probably raising demons or something crazy like that, Vanessa asks, not really expecting an answer. Crowley shrugs. They finally came up to the room where it resides, and a monstrous vamp bursts out of the door and pushes Vanessa to the ground. Crowley quickly pulls the vamp off and up against the wall. Just as he's about to stake him, Vanessa sends a jagged wooden plank laying around through the heart, and it bursts into dust. Vanessa is sitting up on the ground now, swiping away a small nosebleed. Babe, you know using your telekinesis gives you these nosebleeds. You have to be more careful. But Vanessa is mesmerized by the view of the hellmouth through the half-open door. Crowley helps her up and they walk into the room. The heat is a little less bearable, and Vanessa quickly snaps a couple of Polaroids, and they leave quickly. It's the end of Nicky's class, and she heads home. It's not too far. Crowley had trained her to keep her eyes out for any suspicious vamp activity on her way home. If she was to see anything, she was to come home and get him, and they'd handle it together. As she came up on an alley, she could see a young girl struggling to break free from a gruff old man. It couldn't be a vampire. The sun is shining enough to keep them at bay for at least another few hours. I can handle a regular guy, Nicky thought. Leave her alone, Nikki yelled into the alley, her voice shaking a bit. Stay out of this, kid. The man fires back. Call the police. He's trying to kidnap me. The girl yells at Nikki. Shut up, the man says to the young girl. It's okay, Nikki says. I'm stronger than I look. Nikki couldn't really make out the girl's face. I'm warning you, get away from her. Nikki fires back with more confidence. She grabs a rusty pipe from a box of trash in the alley. You're kidding, right? He says, shoving the girl to the ground. Nikki looks at the young girl. Her face is now partially lit by the light coming into the alley. Candace? Nikki asks, shocked, her friend from high school. Suddenly, the guy pulls out a gun. Nikki instinctively throws the pipe at his hand and he drops the gun, and it fires. Nikki knew that would alert others, so she quickly grabbed Candace and they scurried out of the alley. Meanwhile, Nikki and Candace stop by a crowded area and find a bench. Oh my God, Nikki, where have you been? Candace says. I've been here, Nikki says shyly. I'm so sorry about your parents, Nikki. Your mom was the best. I remember she would always let us keep the change when we'd go to the store for her, Candace says, reminiscing. That's right, Nikki says. I almost forgot that, she says, smiling softly from the memory. So where you been? New school? Candace asks. Nikki stands up abruptly. I'm so sorry. I really miss you, Candy, but I have to go. I'm fine, really, Nikki says, motioning to leave. No, wait, Nikki, it's me, Candace. I miss you. I won't pry, I promise, Candace says, hugging her. Nikki softens and returns the sentiment. What are you doing on this side of town anyway? Nikki asks, wiping away happy tears. My mom sent me to this gymnastics place to check it out. You know, be more well-rounded. Colleges look for that kind of stuff, you know. Candace says. Right, Nikki chuckles. Candace was raised by a single mom, and she had 2 other siblings, so Nikki knew she couldn't afford it. But Nikki kept quiet, knowing that she may have to explain too. I know we're both from humble beginnings, but my mom said it's a small sacrifice, Candace says. There's no way she could tell Candace who she was, let alone how she could afford it either. Nikki decided not to push the issue. By the end of the conversation, Nikki had agreed to meet Candace later that night at an old spot they used to meet at. After leaving Candace, Nikki decides to go back to the subway station where the mysterious girl saved her life. She couldn't get it out of her head. Who was this girl, and why did she save her? Nikki traces her steps back to the area where the girl was. As she scurried past the hall that led to the door with the hellmouth, she could feel the intense heat. Finally, she made it to the area. Most of the candles had been blown out, so Nikki pulled out her flashlight. Nikki listened intently. Hello? She says, her voice echoing through the tunnel. I've got some food if you're hungry. By the way, not the best place to set up shop. If you didn't notice, there's a big hole in the ground. Don't be scared. I won't hurt you, Nikki continues. Suddenly, a gruff growl rings from behind. Nikki turns to see a super van towering over her. It backhands Nikki and she flies into the air and hits the ground hard. It roars and races toward Nikki. Nikki quickly gets to her feet and dodges a powerful right hook from the beast. She lands a significant punch to his left side. She quickly follows with a sweeping kick, knocking the super vamp on his back. As she attempts to run past him, the vamp grabs her leg. She pulls out her stake and stabs him in the shoulder, and it lets go. The vamp quickly gains his footing and charges at Nikki with her stake still in him. Just as the vamp grabs her, she dodges, trips him, and he lands on his back again. Nikki quickly pulls the stake out and plunges it into his chest. The vampire explodes into dust. Winding, Nikki takes a second. Wow, you're tough. Didn't think you were gonna make it out of that one, says a mysterious girl. Yeah, well, he's dead now, Nikki says. Hey, wait, you're that girl from the other day. Thanks. You're welcome, but you seem capable. You were watching me that whole time? Nikki asked, rising to her feet. Wanted to see if you can handle yourself for real, she says. I'm Roxy, extending her hand to Nikki. Nikki wipes her hands on her pants and proceeds to shake Roxy's hand. Nikki, she says. You new around here? Asks Roxy. Not really. I've been in this area for maybe a year now. I'm originally from Brooklyn, Nikki says. What are you? Roxy says, curiously. You seem really strong for a little girl, Roxy says, looking her up and down. First off, I'm not a little girl. I've taken down guys 3 times my size and weight, Nikki says, posturing. Okay, I get it, super chick, Roxy says, laughing. How did you kill those vamps the other day? Nikki asked. Vamps? Oh, those weren't vamps. They were like evil spirits. They inhabited regular vampires. And that's what you saw, Roxy says. Then they can take human form and, I don't know, says Roxy. They'll be able to roam the city during the day. Super vamps, Nikki said, realizing what's going on. It's probably that LeBlanc guy. I've seen him down here a couple of times, Roxy says. Nikki's ears perk up and she begins asking more questions. She asked if Roxy had seen what he was doing exactly. She said she didn't know, but after he left one night, the portal opened up, Roxy says. When? Asked Nikki. About 4 nights ago, Roxy says. I know where he lives if you want to have a little fun. Fun? Nikki asked. Yeah. He busted out my place. I think it's time I return the favor. I can't really tonight. I'm meeting a friend. Perfect. I'll come with. And then after, we can go to him. Hey, you get to know where he lives? When? I know you and your dad were looking for him, Roxy says. He's not my dad, Nikki says. Well, fine. You can tell your non-dad where he lives. And then you guys can do whatever you want with him. So, is it a date? Roxy asks playfully. Nikki digresses. Sure. Nikki says. Later that night, Nikki manages to get away to visit Candace. Roxy tags along with Nikki on the way. Nikki agrees to let her come along. The 3 decide to hang out on a rooftop. But on the other side, there's a group of vamps hanging out. Just like them. But they're torturing a young girl and the Slayer is hesitant to act. Candace notices the awkward look on Nikki's face. Roxy takes a swig of her beer during an awkward silence. Suddenly the girl screams and Nikki can't take it. She orders Candace to stay put. Candace is confused. She watches Nikki take out 2 grown men. As Nikki kills the first vampire, Candace notices the guy's face change briefly, just as he explodes into dust. Candace immediately springs up in shock and horror. Roxy assures her it's okay, but Candace looks at Roxy with wide eyes. She's confused as she watches Nikki walk back over with the girl. You live here? Nikki says to the girl. Candace still shaking. Roxy walks over to put her arms around Candace. Yeah, the girl says, responding to Nikki. Well, go home and forget this place. No one would ever believe you anyway. What were they? And who are you? The girl says to Nikki. They were vampires. And yes, they are real. So be careful, Nikki says, her eyes shifting back and forth between Candace and the girl. You didn't answer her second question, Candace says. Nikki moves closer to Candace. I'm a vampire slayer, looking into Candace's eyes. Suddenly, the girl screams, noticing a vampire right behind Candace. He pushes Candace out of the way to get to Nikki and she falls off the roof. Nikki gets tackled by the vampire while simultaneously watching Candace go over. She stakes the vampire and races over to the edge to find Candace dying on the ground. Roxy notices another vamp coming toward them. She struggled with him, but told him, the only way you're getting off this roof alive is if you follow my lead. That girl is the Slayer, and one of your buddies just killed her best friend. What do you think she's gonna do to you? Roxy says. The vamp looks to see Roxy's tail poised to decapitate him. He agrees. Roxy suggests to Nikki to let the vampire bite Candace before her heart stops and she dies. It's the only way to save her, Nikki, says Roxy. But you have to let him live. We'll need him later. She'll need to feed off him. Nikki is confused and scared, and not wanting to tell her parents that their daughter has died. Nikki knows that no one even knows that she was in contact with Candace, and it would look strange if she died in her presence. Nikki agrees with seconds to spare. The vampire bites Candace. As Nikki motions to end the vamp, Roxy stops him. No, that wasn't the deal. I agreed to protect him from you in order to save Candace. Please, Nikki, we have to let him live. She'll need to feed off him in 3 days. Otherwise, the transformation won't take. I can't do this. Just forget it. Let her go, Nikki says. Let her go? Okay, then what happens when her memory comes back? And she remembers where she lives? Do you know what she'll do? She'll go home, and she'll rip her parents and siblings apart. Is that what you want, Nikki? Nikki sighs. No, of course not, Roxy. But what would you suggest? She'll never be able to be with her family in the daylight. So we'll make her write a note, telling them the pressures of college was too much, and she couldn't take it. Roxy says. No, that's insane. Candace would never do that, Roxy. Okay, well then let her go and see what happens, Roxy says. Look, I get it, but at least she gets to live. I'll take her back to my place and try to tame her. Right now, she's too bloodthirsty. When she wakes up, she'll want to kill. And I think it's best that she stays with me. Come see me tomorrow, okay? Fine, Nikki says, and she storms off. Hey, you, Roxy says, referring to the vamp. You're coming with me. Get her. And follow me. Roxy, I can't do this. Just forget it. Just let her go. Nikki says. Let her go? And what do you think will happen when she gets her memories back? And she remembers where she lives? You know what she'll do? She'll go home, and she'll rip her parents and siblings apart. Is that what you want, Nikki? Roxy says.